There is a lot in that session to respond to. There's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of emotion that goes into that. I think the thing that I want to kind of speak to, the thing that was one of the most impactful pieces for me, was this idea of initiation. Um, this notion that we grow into pieces of our lives only through the initiation of other adults. And historically, that has often been our fathers or our father figures, so to speak, who initiate us into the things that previously felt difficult or dangerous, or that we weren't up to it. The role of initiation in a person's life, of basically someone who believes in them, someone who challenges them, someone who calls out from them something that they probably wouldn't have discovered themselves. That is such a key role in the fathers, especially when it's a healthy relationship. When in that role, it's different from, say, a coach who has a similar situation, maybe in some cases, but when that father aspect of being intimate and being loving and caring only for your good, that's a profound piece in our lives, and it's a piece that so many people wind up missing if they have perhaps a stern father who they miss the loving part. In which case, the same product of initiation can seem just cruel. It can seem mean. It's like asking someone that they're incapable of. And I think this is a place also where sometimes we misunderstand God, is that He wants to initiate us, but we have lost that ability to hear His voice coming from a loving place. We imagine it as condemnation. We hear it as judgment, um, and then often then what He wants to do, which is to help us grow, which is to help us achieve more, both in the spirit, in our lives, in our health, wants us to make us more like Christ. But if we can't hear the love in that voice, then it just sounds condemning. But then the opposite is also true: is that if we have a situation where all we ever hear is love, and we never hear the challenge, if we never hear the discipline, if we never hear the rebuke, if we never hear the encouragement, because all we can think of is sort of a soft, floppy, that as if love only means that make good choices, sweetie, is that's all it comes down to. This middle ground that blends both a powerful sense of calling out and encouragement and an initiation into danger, into risk, into strength, into development. We can hear that it is an unstoppable mixture. And so this notion of, like, how did our earthly fathers wound us? And I use the word fathers in quotes. Sometimes it really is our biological father, but it's really any of the places in our lives where we're talking about people who have this role of authority and strength in our lives, who are in that role to either kind of crush us or build us up. And sometimes when we respond to them, or they do a bad job at it, it could really mess with our sense of self-esteem. It can mess with our sense of identity profoundly. Um, this is where, if we miss that wound, if we don't understand how it affected us, how we grew with it, how maybe we embraced it or reacted to it so strongly that we're just as controlled by it as if we had owned it. Um, it's somewhere in the middle where we understand how these wounds affect us on the earthly space, so that we don't keep Christ out of our hearts, where that wound can be healed. And this father wound can be so profound and so deep. So for me, I had two fathers, two earthly fathers. I have a biological father, but I was given up for adoption very early on, like infant early on, and then I had the father who raised me. Um, when I first heard this message, um, I realized that in so many ways, my adopted father, he did so many things right with me. He was affirming, he was loving. He had in hindsight, he had a great ability to blend both just physical affection and basically challenging me as a man. He was actually really good at it. He was a great leader in that regard, and I was very blessed to have him. But that doesn't mean that he was perfect. And so there were other places where he was someone who avoided conflict, and there were places where I really wanted him to stand up for me, to stand up for himself. In that regard, it hurt me that he didn't. Um, and to be clear, like, this isn't about blaming anybody. In fact, this is one of the places I think a lot of people have a hard time with these wound topics, because they feel like it's a blaming their parents, for example, that they're blaming them for something. And it's not about blame at all. This isn't to say that my dad was a bad person. It's to say that we live in a broken world. And it's the enemy who's going to get into any little conversation, any little opportunity. He's going to twist something. He's going to make a very innocent or even like appropriate comment land in a place in such a way that it's broken, that it's twisted, that it's poisonous. But that wasn't my dad who caused all that. That's the enemy. So I'm not blaming my father, but I am aware of those places where certain things just hit you a certain way. And if it's the wrong time of day or if it's the wrong piece in your life, like we're imperfect people. So with him, it was later. It was much later in my life that I came to understand those places where I had been hurt and where it had really made me like unhealthily independent and feisty about it. Um, but then later in my life, like in my mid 40s, I actually was found by my biological family. So now I get to meet my biological father. And now here's a man who, like, literally I have no interaction with. And I, frankly, I was adopted as an infant, so I never really thought about it. But then you meet someone, and I was shocked at how deep was this wound that basically said, like, why did you let me go? It was a wound of abandonment that I'd never even realized was there until I saw him face to face. And again, not his fault. I totally know the story, and he made the right call. It's just that child in us, that little boy who only understands the world as it is, can't interpret anything any other way. It was hurtful, and to have that wound sort of brought up in that moment was really difficult. But luckily, I was prepared for it. I'd been through this enough to process it through, and taught me a lot. So, anyways, the topic of father wounds, which of course couples with another session we've done on mother wounds, um, at the bottom of both of these is this notion of which, if we never get to the place where we recognize that things happened to us that mattered, and not only did they matter, but they affected us, that they changed how we went about life, they changed about how we did things, then we can never find freedom from them. Basically, a wound unentered is a wound that can never heal. Um, and also to know that understanding is not the same thing as clarity. So even knowing about the wounds is not the same thing as healing the wounds. Um, and so it's really important that we think of these things and then understand that they have changed our lives and they continue to change our lives. Um, but then that there's healing available. So we invite Jesus into those places and we find restoration that can happen sometimes in an instant, sometimes it takes years, but the healing happens. And it's the most important thing you can do. It's like you got to understand that these wounds change your trajectory towards heaven. Getting them out of your way is a mission to take on seriously. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this one up and see you on the backside.